and this is a quick video on how to help people in a crisis situation. And I'm definitely not trying to imply that you should or shouldn't help people in a crisis situation, but sometimes I'll see people in different scenarios where I've never really been in that position. Like, let's say they lost someone or they're dealing with like illness or something like that, and I'll like want to help, but I feel like I don't really know how, and I don't want to make things worse by doing or saying the wrong thing. And so that's why I'm making this video. Isn't to imply that you should help, but just if you actually want to help but you don't know how, these are some things that I learned from being in that situation. Because for me, my husband got suddenly arrested and I didn't have any access to money or transportation. My utilities were getting shut off. I didn't have food. Didn't have water. I had no idea how to make money. I didn't have a phone. I didn't know how things worked, etc. Whatever. So it was like I was in a completely having a total panic, and then a bunch of people helped me, and that let me survive, and it really transformed me. And so I feel like I learned a lot from what they did, and so that's what I'm basing this on. Okay, so here's what not to do. I mean, the worst thing you could possibly do when someone's in that situation would be to say something like, oh, you should have whatever, like say something condescending or just disparaging. I mean, that's obvious. I'm sure you know that. But something else that's like not super helpful is to give positive words, right? Like, you got this, or like, one day you'll realize this was wonderful, or whatever. I mean, those positive statements aren't super helpful, because when you're in a state of crisis, your brain shrinks and it's really hard to process anything, right? So it's like you don't want to give the person stuff for their brain to process that doesn't concretely help them, right? Because right now I'm talking about people who need food, shelter, transportation, clothing, warmth, water, just like basic things. Like giving them words is really more of a tax on their brain, and it doesn't help them. It's very similar to if you walked by and you saw someone drowning in the river, right? You wouldn't just be like, I'm praying for you, or you got this, you know what I mean? That doesn't really like translate super well under the circumstances. So then the third thing, which is maybe a little less obvious, is I would not recommend just giving this person, telling them like, call the Red Cross, call the Salvation Army, this person helps people, or giving them like a long list of resources to contact. And the reason why is because 97% of those resources are going to be dead ends, but the person is going to have to go on a long goose chase before they reach that dead end. So if you are wanting to help the person by connecting them with resources, I would highly recommend calling those resources yourself, right? Since their brain is going to be like completely fried, but your brain is going to work better. So you call those resources yourself and be like, I have a friend who doesn't have electricity and she's worried her grandmother will die because she's elderly and the house is really cold, or whatever the situation might be. Call the resources yourself and see if they can actually help. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, you know, like, oh no, sorry, we only da-da-da-da-da, or they will say, you need to call this person, da-da-da, and then you call that person, and that person will likely say, oh, you need to call this person, da-da-da, and that person will likely say, oh, you need to call this person, da-da-da, and then you will end up having gone in a complete loop. Or in some cases, you will just reach a dead end. So that's generally what's going to happen with resources, which is why I don't recommend that as a way of helping, because most likely you're just wasting that person's time. But what would be helpful if you think a resource might be good is to contact them yourself and see how far along you can get in the process before you involve the other person, right? Since their brain is just like really limited. And if you find someone that can help, you know, that you could maybe like see how far you can go in that process before you hand it over to the person who's in the state of crisis. But most of the times you'll probably be surprised to realize that, like, don't just find them a number, you know what I mean? If they say call this person, don't just give that person a number. Actually call that person yourself and see what happens, you know what I mean? See if you can actually get your hands on the prize, because you probably will not be able to. So yeah, that's what I would recommend in terms of connecting people with resources. Okay, so then what you can do, that's the most obvious thing and most helpful thing really, is if the person's having a material crisis, give them material help. Like this could be like giving them food, shelter, money if they need money. That's a huge one. I mean, money is just like super helpful in most cases. Like if they're cold, you give them blankets and space heaters. If they don't have transportation, you can offer them rides. If they need clothes, you can help with that. It's like whatever their tangible and material needs are. If you can just like swoop in and help them with those needs, that's really what's going to make the biggest difference. And I highly recommend taking a very proactive approach, because if you're like, oh, do you need any help? There's a good chance that the person is going to say no, even if they desperately need help, because it can be humiliating to take charity, or you just feel like really guilty about it, and it's just weird, and it's just sometimes feels easier to just die than to like be like, yeah, can you help me? You know what I mean? So I would highly recommend just kind of taking a slightly aggressive approach. Like, okay, I'm going to bring you food. Like, okay, I want to give you money. Where can I send it? Like, don't say like, do you need anything? Just be like, I want to help you in this way or that way. Where can I take the food? Where can I send the money? That is probably going to be the most helpful. Just consider what material needs they have and just directly help them yourself. And also, let's say that you're like let's say that you're poor yourself. You shouldn't feel at all ashamed about helping the person in a tiny way. Like you could give them $10, or you could, maybe you could give them one meal or something. It's like, or a blanket or something. It could be something really small, but those tiny efforts still show that you care, in a way that words really don't show that you care under the circumstances. So even if you are very strapped for resources yourself, I would highly recommend, don't feel bad giving a tiny bit, because symbolically that still really can make a big difference. And also those tiny bits really do add up. So don't feel ashamed of that at all. And the last thing I have to say is, if you want to accompany your giving by some form of words, I remember feeling so relieved that no one told me to pay it forward, for example, because like all these people were helping me, and I'm like, fuck, I can't pay, I'm not going to be able to like return the favor, because I was realizing it would be 5 years to an eternity before I would actually be on my feet and where I could be like, oh, here, now let me help you. So it's like, the fact that nobody said pay it forward, I was just dreading hearing that, but nobody said it. It's like everyone seemed to know what to do. Like the people knew what I needed more than I did, really. But it did make me feel good when people said something like, oh, well, you're worth it because you've done this or this or this good thing, as though they were not as though they were giving me something and now I'm in debt and I need to pay it forward, but like they're just paying me for something that I've already given, in a sense. Do you know what I mean? Like if you say to someone, oh, well, like you've contributed so much, like giving you this loaf of bread is the least I can do, then that's going to make the person feel better, because there is like probably going to be an element of guilt and shame for having to be on the receiving end. So if you make it less like you're like some kind of saint who's helping a total loser, and you make it more like you're just like kind of giving them something that they're worth in the first place, that's like, that definitely feels a lot better on the receiving end. And in reality, if you see like that guy drowning in the river, you likely don't know why he's there. He might be there because he just saved 5 kids or something. You can't assume that he's there because he just like was an irresponsible drunk who ended up in the river, It's like, I think it's definitely worthwhile to not assume that a person in need is there because they're a total loser, or even because they made bad decisions. Because you really don't know. Sometimes it could be there because they made good decisions. Do you know what I mean? Like Jesus on the cross. He was doing the right stuff. He still ended up on the cross. So, I think we should be like a little bit less quick to judge people who are in bad situations and assume that they are morally inferior to us, or even that they made worse choices than we've made. Maybe they made all the right choices and they still ended up in a bad situation. And the last thing I want to say is that I do highly recommend helping people who are in a crisis, because it's like your efforts at that time, even small efforts, are going to have a huge impact on them, on their life, but also their mind and their heart. And then that's going to have a reverberating impact, because they're going to want to like show that same generosity to other people. And it's just like, it's a time when your efforts can mean so much. You know what I mean? It's like most of us can give a little bit of money or give a little bit of food or whatever without it really being a big deal. But it's going to be a huge deal to the person on the receiving end. So it's like you're just getting a huge bang for your buck. And that's one reason I would really recommend helping people when they experience some form of a life crisis. But like I said, this is really just for people dealing with a more material crisis. As for like emotional types of crises, I really don't feel like I'm in a position to know, because I've never had an emotional crisis. Anyway, I'm Julie Naklii, and this is a quick video on how to best help people in a crisis. Thank you.